I developed this initially with David Weiss, so I'm sure he'll be able to answer any questions you guys have about that. I'm going to talk a little bit about theory, some nuts and bolts, and some tips for dealing with procurement. But before we get into the nuts and bolts, the concept of profit is pretty well linked with value. So, along the lines of what a lot of other speakers talked about earlier is, well, what is an ad worth? Well, I'm not going to ask Michael Larson because he has all the answers. But is there somebody else that would hazard a guess? Is Paul Suchman in the audience still, or is he gone? Neil, you want to hazard a guess? How much is an ad worth?
It could be worth $1 billion.
That's a good answer.
We had a client who told us that we gave them $1 billion activity.
That's a good answer. Well, this might help frame it a little. 400,000. Anybody see the article on Apple in the Times last week? This is the average profit per employee at Apple. I thought that was an interesting benchmark. Now, our procurement folks aren't always so generous. This is what one of our procurement clients wanted to pay us an hour for developing ads. Now, it wasn't in the United States. I'll give you that disclaimer. The profit motive, without lecturing too much, it was first discussed in Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations in the Industrial Revolution. My daughter is learning about that in history right now, so I pulled that out. At the time, it was one of the key planks of how people were motivated. Milton Friedman, now he says it's the sole purpose of economics. So it's not just a theoretical construct. Well, it does have its own Facebook page. But why is it so important? It's the reason we're all here. But if you back up, agencies exist to solve business problems for their clients. But to do that, they need the best talent. Andrew talked about how the best ads are 40 times more effective than the least. But in order to get that, you need to get the talent that's best. And that costs money. In order to hire that talent, you need to pay appropriate profit levels. The investment community, also, we asked them for their opinion, and they gave us a couple of quotes on how important it is to them. We're fragile enterprises. We're not like a Mars where if they sell a lot of Snickers, they can capitalize on that. Every hour is lost unless we charge for it. We're one of the first to lose money in an economic downturn, and if we're not able to sell our time, we'll lose that. And in a relationship-based business, the client contracts are really only as good as what our clients tell us they'll do for us. So no matter on what basis the profits are examined, their profitability is substantially lower than the major advertiser clients. Now, I borrowed this from Darren just to reiterate, when you're negotiating with a client, find out as much as you can. First, what benefits you're trying to give them, but also what is their profit margin? Particularly in the pharma world, I find that they pay the least, but they have the highest margins. But I think it helps to understand that. Going back to the Apple example. And what are the consultants saying? Well, we're all under extreme pressure from our holding companies, to increase our margins. And you'll see in the next slide one of the latest surveys, and this is from David Beal's latest trends. Basically, the agency margin is relatively flat at 14%. Now, we're all asked for margins much greater than that. In particular, and you may be familiar with this slide from an earlier ANA presentation, and this is the scary part to me. Profit margin reported by agency. So on average, we've reported, this is the latest year's, 14%. Profit margin considered acceptable by client, on average 12. Agency request considered accepted, 16. Now, the thing, this is really scary. Clients thinking that under 5% is acceptable, under 10% is acceptable. None of us are going to be rewarded for that sort of performance. And if we're changing our clients' businesses, that's not a reward. That's the reason we're in business, for profit, and that's how we're being rewarded, well, I mean, what's the point? Almost half of our major clients believe that an agency profit of 10 to 15% is acceptable, and the proportion is growing. Over 40% request a margin of 12 to 20, and just under a third report margins of over 17.6. So when you're dealing with your the cost consultants, they have this right at their fingertips if you're asking for a higher margin. So this is something we have to battle against, provide value in excess of the average. And I think about how the next time the survey comes around, I mean, we weren't asked, but we should find out and try to see how we can influence that. So that's sort of my soapbox part of my presentation. Now I'll go on to the nuts and bolts. Probably a lot of this is familiar to most of you. Interestingly enough, you'd think this would be simple, but I'd say once a quarter, I have a client coming to me or a consultant saying, hey, you're on a theoretical client, your profit margin's 25%. I said, no, it isn't, it's 20. They don't know the difference between markup and margin, so we'll walk through some of that. So margin versus markup, you would think it would be simple, and it is, but our clients don't always understand that. Our major consultants don't understand that. It's pretty simple. Revenue minus cost is profit. But, and this is the best example, I would think, to calculate it. So 20 over 100 is 20%. But if your costs are 80 and you want to get to a 20% margin, you need to multiply 80 by 25 to get 20. So that's a little trick you could take away. Now I have in the deck that you'll get more expanded calculation, and then this is in some of the 4A's guides. Some of my colleagues thought it would be helpful to show a comparison of different P&Ls, client P&L versus our P&L. Now, it's not really all that straightforward, but it may come in handy when you're dealing with different clients in different industries. So for example, a typical client financial statements, you have sales or turnover, cost of goods, gross profit. A typical agency, what you're looking at is a lot different. However, if you were to take an agency's P&L and gross it up for billings, you would get a different example. So if you put them side to side, the margins on the total turnover and billings are a lot smaller relative to a client's P&L. Now, I understand it's not apples and apples, but this may be an example that you can use in your particular circumstances. Another topic that was alluded to earlier, I think Darren brought it up, is sometimes consultants say incentive compensation, that's really your bonus. So the bonus should be taken out of your profit. Well, it's not part of our profit. Profit goes to the shareholders. A friend of mine who used to work for FCB a long time ago, he said, 44% belongs to the shareholders. Well, we try to get there. We're not there yet. But the incentive comp is part of compensation. So that's one of the tricks that the consultants will try to get you on. Another thing that comes up once in a while, and Rick talked about this on the overhead, is that there is sometimes clients who'll come and say, well, hey, on the comm, your profit margin total is 11%, you're asking for X plus that. There is a difference. There's holding company costs, debt, et cetera. It's important to know the distinction. And within the holding company costs, in each holding company is different. There are different kinds of costs. But these are the types of things that are typically included. Some are, some aren't, which could explain what the holding company costs are that are included in your overhead, or what aren't, and that explains the difference in profit margins. So, as Jean-Marie Drew said, we're faced with a paradox. On the one hand, clients have never leaned more on us. On the other, we've never been in a more difficult situation to justify remuneration.